Today's video was recorded on April 25th, 2024, and this is continuing our journey through the Gospel of John. So this lesson is the sixth in our series, and this is going to begin an exploration of the concept of Jesus as the Word. And so today we're going to look at the Greek, which is the logos. Now, the Greek idea of logos is complex and the writings on it are vast. And the word means so much more than our English noun word. And this is what we're going to have to deal with today. So in this lesson, I mention the importance of having a good Bible dictionary. These Bible dictionaries help us with these ancient concepts that we find within Scripture. But I also realize most people are not going to have a Bible dictionary handy. So what I did was I put together a short review of the word logos for you. It's in a PDF. You can download it at our website, figtreeteaching.com. You can also find links above and below. But make sure you download that and read it. It'll be very helpful for you to build up the concept that's behind this Greek word logos, which we translate word, and that John and his original audience would have had. And this is where we're going today in this lesson. We want to understand, how would a first century Greek living in Ephesus, how would they have understood that word logos and what it means then about Jesus? So again, I think having something to read and reflect upon will be very helpful when it comes to this complex topic. Now, we'll eventually get to, in our next lesson, the Hebrew and the wisdom traditions within Judaism, and ultimately the Aramaic concept of word, and in Aramaic it's memra, and then how they use the memra of God in their translations of the Hebrew scriptures. This is actually really cool if you're not familiar with what are called the Targum. Targum is just a word that means translation, but scholars today, if you say Targum, we're specifically talking about the translations of the Hebrew Bible into Aramaic. So today we're going to begin looking at John and the logos. What does that mean? How is he applying it to Jesus? What does it tell us about the way John thinks about Jesus? So I hope this lesson and that associated handout, make sure you download that. I hope that it helps to illuminate the logos of God and what it meant to John's first century audience. So enjoy today's lesson. Okay, folks, so we have finally made it to the actual text of the Gospel of John. So up until this point, which has been 5 lessons, the first 5 lessons are really an introduction. And as I was designing this series, I was trying to set the stage. How is John writing? What is he communicating to us? Because the hard part of reading John is seeing how he's structuring his text, which tells us then what he's communicating to us. And so, if you haven't seen the first 5 parts, well, it would be very helpful because it does lay that foundation so that as you move into the actual writing of John, you already have an idea of where he's going. Now, today, we're going to actually get to the text, but this is going to be another type of introductory video, and it's going to have to do with the logos. And the concept of the logos, logos means word, and we find this in John 1:1, so the opening verse. And of course, this is one of the most well-known verses in the Bible. But what did that mean? If you were a first century person, particularly Greek, this week we'll look at the Greek. If you were Greek or Jewish, and you understand not just how to translate logos into word, but what's the concept behind it? Now, there's absolutely no way. This is a vast and complex topic. Take whatever large amount of information and writing on a topic that you could possibly have, and then double it again, and you're not even close to what's been written about the logos and how far back it goes. So it does get complex. I'm not going to try to go into that. I just want to give you an idea that this was something that his first century audience would have their own concept of, okay? And obviously what makes this important is this idea of logos is going to eventually flow into our concept of the Trinity, our understanding of that Trinity. So, by at least understanding the background of logos, well, then it can help you with the way that those early Christians were thinking about Jesus as the Son of God, and then that evolving into the doctrine of Trinity. Now, that takes a couple hundred years to get it fully fleshed out. Through all of the debates and disagreements, we've come up with what we would call orthodox, right thinking, the orthodox document about the Trinity. But again, a vast topic, and all I want to do today is introduce you to the topic, help raise your awareness. Now, there's a lot written on this. I'll provide some resources for you. If you're interested in studying more, check the show notes below, and there should be some links in there. Now, the background painting today, this is from a basilica in Sicily, and it's from the Byzantine era, and there's a Greek word, pantocrator. And so they came up with these images, which are pantocrator. And pantocrator is a word that means all-powerful. So this is a depiction telling the people of that day that who's the all-powerful one in charge of all things? Well, it's Jesus, okay? So let's go right away to the text. We're finally going to read some of John. This is going to start John 1, verse 1. I'm pulling this from the New Heart English Bible. This is a rather new translation of the Bible. So let's look at John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word. Now, right there, in the beginning, what's John doing? He's pointing you right back to Genesis 1. And when he does that, in the beginning was the Word, okay? He immediately connects us to Genesis 1. And if you remember from the first couple lessons that we talked about, the structure that John has that underlies his gospel, there's an actual structure there. What's the structure? Creation. So John, by starting out his gospel with in the beginning, those three words, takes you right back to Genesis 1, and it's a retelling of the creation story. So the whole Gospel of John is a retelling of creation. It's as if in Jesus' incarnation, ministry, death, resurrection, and ascension, the entire cosmos is being born again. Okay? So this is what John is up to. So go back and check those out. But in the beginning was what? The Word, and the Greek word there, logos. In the beginning was the Word. Then John keeps going. And the Word, the logos, was with God, and the Word, logos, was God. Now, right here, as I've mentioned in previous lessons, John is a mystic, and he's going to present you with paradoxes. And so right off the bat, what do we find? The word logos was with God. Now, that word with, you would think, okay, something with God, but not God. Or with God, but different than just God. But then it says, and the word was God. Okay? So we've got, right off the bat, a paradox. It's something there. It's with God, and it also is God in some way, shape, or form. Okay? And that's where the paradox comes in. Okay. Now, it's important to see this, that when I started out this series on John, we spent the first couple lessons talking about how John is a mystic. There's a category called mystic, and his letter is a mystical document. Now, why? Why was I emphasizing this idea? Well, it has to do with learning and understanding about the category of mystic. What were the mystics concerned with? And what they're concerned with is the fundamental reality of his existence as it is, okay? And so any time that you have something from the Old Testament that is going to give us a glimpse into the nature of reality. So like Genesis 1, Ezekiel 1, where the vision that Ezekiel has, Daniel, when Daniel is looking into the heavens, Genesis 28, Jacob's ladder, all of those are moments in the scripture when we are given a glimpse into the nature of reality, what is beyond the veil that obscures our ability to see there. And so to understand the category of mystic helps you recognize that the mystics are just very intent about delving into the nature of reality. And this is exactly what John is doing. And now you can see this reflected immediately in the opening verse of his gospel. He's telling us something about the nature of what is. That this logos, the word, was there at the beginning, is with God, but is also the same substance as God, and that through this word, the logos, all things are created and held together. Now, the problem is, if you just talk to a normal Greek person on the street, even today, if you say, hey, look out your window, don't you see the logos? And the answer is, no, I don't see that at all. And if you go back to the Hebrew Bible, to our Old Testament, there's nothing that explicitly says the nature of reality is such. So what's John talking about, right? Well, he's giving us that glimpse into the nature of reality. All of those verses that I mentioned, Genesis 28, Ezekiel 1, Daniel 7, when the heavens open up and they look up in there, there's somebody up there. There's an individual, right? The Lord or the Son of Man in Daniel. So when we open up the nature of reality, there's a figure, one like the Son of Man. But this is part of the mystical idea, right? We can't look out our window with our physical eyes. So we use our other senses and we use our spiritual senses and we intuit the nature of reality. And this derives, I've mentioned this in previous lessons, from the wisdom tradition. That is, you have the tradition of Torah, go live this way, do this commandment, do this commandment, do this commandment. It's all external. But then later in the Bible, like Ecclesiastes and Job and Proverbs, you start getting into wisdom tradition, and wisdom is internal, so that you're seeing something about the structure of reality, but you're doing it internally, okay? So this is the logos. This logos is a mystery. In the biblical usage, a mystery. Now, as I've previously said, if you understand how the Bible uses mystery, it's not that it's something that can't be understood. How do you understand something like the logos? It's through initiation, meaning you have to learn something, and the process of revelation, that as you learn and you contemplate this idea of logos, God is going to reveal something to you. That's the phenomenon that we have as Christians, is that as we grow with God, things are revealed to us that weren't there before. Okay? So the logos is itself a mystical concept in that it resides in the heavens. It's a mystery to normal people. But if we enter into that covenant relationship with Jesus, and through the process of initiation and revelation, we come to understand what John is talking about. And if you remember, previous lesson, we talked about the word sacrament. The word sacrament means mystery. And so our baptism, our Lord's Supper, those are the mysteries that we engage with. Because it's not always evident what is happening when we're engaging with those. But the fact is that we are engaging in communion or regeneration through these sacraments, through the mysteries. What's the big deal then? Why is it such a big deal that John uses this Greek word logos? So the word logos means word, but actually we don't want to just look at a straight translation. We want to look at the concept that comes along with it. And one of the main points, if you get nothing else out of this lesson that you're watching, is realize that the idea, the concept that exists behind the word logos is not a new idea. This is a concept that extends back both in the Greek philosophical circles, but also within Judaism and the wisdom tradition for literally hundreds of years. And what's happening is it's being fleshed out through the process, both philosophical. Philosophical means to love wisdom. Philo is love, Sophia is wisdom, so it's the love of wisdom. Wisdom is concerned with the nature of reality. In Judaism, you have the wisdom tradition, which is concerned with the nature of reality. They're both doing the same thing, and in some way they're coming up with an answer that is similar now, but it's not well defined. It's still quite granular at the time, okay? So what's new, of course, is that John's going to connect this concept of logos to a human being who was incarnated, who lived, died, and was resurrected. That's the radical part. Okay? But the concept of logos in that first century was not new, and it wasn't new to John's original audience. So what we have to do as modern Christians, we're post the doctrine of the Trinity. And we tend to be unaware of the history behind the word, or word, which is logos. And then it gets clouded because we're looking back through a 2,000-year lens of church history and the dogmas that exist about the Trinity. And sometimes those will get in the way, and they might get in the way as you're going through this study, because I'm going to try to not go into the process of how we got the Trinity, but what was happening in John's day. And so we can go from logos to Trinity, but you have to realize that path unfolds with many twists and turns for the next 3 or 4 centuries. And not everybody agreed, because you're looking at something mystical, which we can't see. And the tighter you try to hold on to it, the more it slips through your fingers. So we have to work to separate our own understanding of the Trinity and to try to see it through those first century eyes in the way that John was communicating. So, I think it's pretty cool. I think, I want to have grace for these people who are struggling with the nature of reality. And at one point in my life, I did too. And many people, well-intentioned people, they're trying to understand that nature of reality, and they're coming up with something about reality that John's going to eventually come along and say, okay, now that is Jesus. Now, I'm not saying that the Greeks got it right, but they also don't have the special revelation from God. They only have general revelation. And you have to learn what's the difference between special. Google that, special versus general revelation. Israel has the special revelation. They have the word of God in their hands. The Greeks are dealing with general revelation. Revelation that's available to all people, but it's not specific. So check out Paul's comments in it's Romans 2, verse 14 and 15 about the Gentiles. We have the ability, if you're outside that covenant, you don't have the specific word of God, to be able to understand something about the nature of reality. And I think it's cool. They at least were coming close to something that you could read John and say, oh, wait a minute. That's our understanding of the logos. Okay. It's very common for us these days to look at anybody in the past and judge them unfairly, because everybody in their own time is struggling with what the nature of reality is and right and wrong and all of that. And so, just realize if we're judging the people in the past today as, hey, they're wrong, we're right, well, guess what's going to happen in the future? Someone's going to look back at us and be judging us. So we have to be careful that we're not looking down our noses through the lens of history because we're so much better than everybody else. That's kind of my point. Okay, so let's take a look at this concept of logos, and it really is a concept rather than a statement or a definition or a simple proposition. Okay, there's a lot around it. And we'll start with the word that will eventually be translated word. So we're going to be looking at 3 things. We're going to look at the Hebrew, that's dabar, and we're going to look at the Aramaic, and that's memra. And that is actually where I think John is getting all of his what he's drawing from is the Aramaic memra. But we'll do that next week. We're going to look at the Hebrew, the history within Jewish wisdom tradition, and then the tradition of translating Hebrew into Aramaic, which is called the Targum, and the word memra. And then finally, and what we'll do today is the Greek, and in Greek, it's logos. That means word, but it also means a whole lot more, okay? They use it in a technical sense. So we have Greek logos, and the first thing, whenever you're studying the Bible, the very first thing you want to do is get a good Bible dictionary. Now, they can often be pricey, I understand that, but a good Bible dictionary can provide immense benefit for you. And so, in this case, this Bible dictionary, so I was a seminary, my degree is, it's a Master's of Divinity in Biblical Studies. Biblical Studies is different than theological studies, but biblical studies, because biblical studies is culture and history and language and these concepts that come along with it. And then my emphasis was on Old Testament. My point is, though, for any biblical studies major, this is like our Bible of all Bible dictionaries. This is called the Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary. And so when I give you the definitions, so if you want to find out about logo, you open up, in this case, it's volume 4, because this comes in 6 volumes. You open up volume 4, which is only K through N, and you look up logos, and there's about 10 or 12 pages describing as many possible uses as you can without getting too extensive. So we'll start with this. When we look at the idea of logos, we're going to start with the verb, and the verb here is lego. And so there's 2 senses with this verb, and then from that, you're going to get a groupings of nouns, okay? So the first one would be to gather. As they study Greek, they go as far back as possible in Greek to look how was lego used, and it's to gather. Now, what does that mean? What are we doing when we're gathering? Well, we're separating, we're discerning, we're moving one from another, we're choosing. It could be to count, it could be to recount, it could be to take an account. So gathering implies that you're discerning between 2 things. And then that way you would count or you would take an account. And the New Testament uses that, uses the idea of logos as an account. So now that's one way. Another way is to narrate, to speak, or to say, and that's a verb. And that's, of course, that's going to line up with the Hebrew debar as well. So if you start there, there's kind of 2 different concepts. And we would say, okay, from this verb, lego, which is gather, count, recount, or narrate, speak, say, now you're going to get all these nouns, groupings of nouns that come out. And on the side of gather, count, recount, what do you think they would be relating to? Well, you have words like computation or reckoning. I'm going to take in a reckoning of an account, which means I'm going to count something or I'm going to measure something. It's going through the process of discerning one from another. It's also used for ratio, a ratio, and the final one, proportion. Now, this is interesting because what the Greeks are going to do, even though we have logos as a noun that means word, it's a word that orders things. And you say, now, how did they get that? Well, it's because logos has a whole nother side to it that is different than just speaking. Okay, so on the other side, the narrate, speak, say, well, you could get a speech. That's a noun. A saying, that's a noun, and that's used in the New Testament. A narration, and then, of course, how we use it is word. But notice, it has to do with everything. So it's not just a word in this case, but when you think about it cosmically, you look at the cosmos and you say, wow, proportionally, this cosmos is perfect. There's order that we see in the cosmos. Well, there must be something behind it, right? And we're going to see that the Greeks relate this word, logos, word. If you're a human being in the human mind, it's the ability to reason rationally about something. Because when you're reasoning, you have measured speech. And you notice you have a speech that's been measured, that's been accounted for, that's been discerned. When you're gathering your words, right? When you're reasoning, you're gathering your words very carefully to create something. And so it's an idea of discerning between words. And so they can make this connection that is often lost on us English speakers who don't use word like this. Okay, so it's much more about the concept. Let me give you, this is a quote directly from the Anchor Bible Dictionary. It says, "The logos can mean the process by which both computations and explanations are produced." So notice it's both computation, but it's also the process of that computation. It can be an explanation if it's the human mind doing the discerning, the measuring, the counting, then it becomes an explanation. So this is something that human beings engage in. They engage the logos. Well, if human beings can engage the logos, then there must be a principle in the universe that is just like what we have in our own ability. And so it says, in this context, the logos refers to the process of human reasoning, human rationality, and then, more broadly, to the rational principle of the universe. And so the Greeks took this to the cosmic level, right? They're looking at the universe as rational and proportional. They look at flowers and trees and the cycles of nature and the movement of the stars, and they say this didn't happen by accident. There must be a rational principle behind the cosmos that holds all things together, that created it in order, or that ordered the cosmos. Now, in fact, the Greek word cosmos, and John uses that word cosmos, it's usually translated into English as world, like for God so loved the world, it's for God so loved the cosmos. That word cosmos means beauty, order. The universe is beautiful, and it's made beautifully. It's mathematically proportional. This is Pythagoras would use it that way to talk about mathematically how amazing the universe is. And we have a word, cosmotology, right? What are we doing? It's the adornment for women. Cosmetology, the purposes of beauty. We have makeup and jewelry. So that idea of cosmos comes out of an ordering principle that must exist because we can see it in the world. Okay, and that's kind of that general revelation. So this word logos, the point is, the word logos takes on the meaning of this rational principle that lies behind the ordering of all the cosmos. Now, what I want to do is take you through a bit of a timeline here. We're going to go all the way back to 500 BC, and then we're going to cycle forward to, I mentioned, we're just placing John at about 95 AD, okay? Now, if you think about this, this is 600 years of history that the word logos is going to mean more than just a word. But 600 years within Greek thinking. And today, we're only dealing with the Greeks. We'll do the Jewish side next week. But 600 years within Greek thinking about this concept of logos. And John knows this. And he knows that by using that word for word, logos, that he's going to bring in an entire set of conceptions that the Greeks already have, because this has been around for a while. Now, scholars generally begin with one of the very early, he's a pre-Socratic, that's a before Socrates, philosopher, Heraclitus. Now, he uses logos, he uses it in normal ways, like as an account or as a word or a speech, but then he's also going to use it as a technical term, meaning it's beyond its regular usage. Because now we also have the measuring and the ratio and proportion, and so he uses it for that underlying principle that orders in the cosmos. And for the Greeks, the logos was primary, and it was presupposed to be self-evident within Greek thought, right? The logos is something that makes knowledge and enlightenment and understanding possible, because they recognize they're watching the phenomenon of their own life, And what they're very carefully paying attention to what's going on inside of them. That's wisdom. And I recognize enlightenment, the process of learning something. Oh, well, there must be a force that provides that. I mean, you think about the verb to gather. If you're gathering, it's purposefully dividing. You're discerning one from the other. And they recognize that this logos of the cosmos that enables us to do that. And the idea of logos, it isn't just something for them that's theoretical, right? This is a phenomenon that happens. It works on a human being. And they can recognize it in their groups. They can recognize it in themselves. They can recognize it in their cities. And so this is a really important idea, and it goes way back as far as an ordering principle of the cosmos. Now, what's even better? Guess what? Where is our first philosopher here, Heraclitus, from? He's from the city of Ephesus. And that's where John's writing from. Now, of course, John knows this because he would be a hero of the city of Ephesus. So that's where we begin, about 500 BC, and the philosopher is Heraclitus. Now, quickly, because it starts to get more confusing, between Plato and Aristotle, they do use the word logos. They use it in a number of different ways, but it's brought down from the cosmos down to a philosophical, individual level, but it's still an important word. And then what we get is by the time the Stoics come around, this is where it's going to start getting important, because this Stoic thought is going to be influencing those closer to our New Testament writing, and then even some of the Jewish wisdom tradition that's written in Greek. So you come to the Stoics, and the concept of the logos is central to their thought. And in the case of the Stoics, their concept of logos is going to be approximate to the way we think about God. And so if you were in that Greek world and you have the Stoic concept of logos and you went over to the popular gods, it would be Zeus as the father of the Greek gods. But logos for them, it enlightens your mind. It brings light where there was once darkness. It's transcendent. It's supreme. You can see that the word logos, and I think this is part of my main point today, the word logos, by the way, let me tell you this. One of the leading cities for Stoic philosophy in the first century was a place called Tarsus. Now, who comes from Tarsus? Paul. Paul's very familiar with Stoic ideas. Stoicism is actually making a comeback these days because people are looking for a philosophy to follow in life that brings some order and some structure to their life. So, the Stoics were against lying, and they were against, body behavior just as much as Paul was. Now, they don't connect it to a covenant God who created the cosmos, but the point is, Paul's not against their ideas of don't lie. He recognizes it, but he recognizes it through the relational covenant with God rather than just how do I live a life to be happy. But Stoicism, many modern Christians today would be practicing Stoic ideas because you live a life of moderation. That's a Stoic idea. Okay, but you can see here, the word logos, it was widely used within the Greek philosophical thought, and is, as in the case with the Stoics, could easily be equated with God. Now, I'll get to the differences in a minute, but I hope you can see that by the time John, 600 years later, is using this word in the opening sentence of his gospel, he knows that there's going to be all the concepts of the logos that are going to come flooding in to the mind of a Greek who's living there near Ephesus in that first century. Okay, that's the important thing. And so if we go to the opening verses of John, this is John 1 through 5, this would go right along with some of the philosophical thought there about the word logos. This is not going against the Greeks. In fact, for a long time within church history, especially in the early church, the only concept of logos they had was the Greek concept, and they married it up here with John. But if we look at verses 1 through 5, In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's logos. And he was in the beginning, and he was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and apart from him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and the life was the light of humanity. Think about the enlightening process that the Greeks had. Think about reason is the logos for the Greeks is the thing that orders all of the cosmos, that makes it beautiful, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness hasn't overcome it. So right there, that opening verse could easily marry up, and in early Christianity was often thought to be marrying up with the Greek concept of logos. But that's not what we think today, okay? So when we eventually get to the Jewish side, we're going to we're going to look at the wisdom traditions, we're going to look at the Aramaic, and then we're also going to talk about this fellow right here. His name is Philo, and he was from Alexandria, Egypt, so Philo of Alexandria. Now, what's unique about Philo is he lived in the first century, the first half of the first century, and he's Jewish. Now, he's a devout Jew, but he's writing in Greek, and what he's doing is he's attempting to influence his Greek audience to help them understand the wisdom of the Hebrew Scriptures, that they're not a bunch of crazy stories compared to your Greek thought, but that they line up rather nicely. And the thing is, he's also going to use the word logos. Now, he uses it in what ends up being a very Jewish way, but it's also similar to something that you may think about the Greek way, and it's very similar to how John is using it. So many scholars point to Philo and say, is John borrowing from Philo, or was he at least influenced by Philo? Now, again, we'll cover him in later lessons, but John would definitely be familiar with his work. And so the idea, what Philo helps us understand is that these ideas are not created by John. They're in the first century. And you can see some of the things that Paul writes, we can connect to Philo. Some of the things that John writes, we can connect to Philo. But it means that everybody already had something in mind, and now the gospel writers are going to clarify. And that's what the gospels are going to end up doing for those first century people. There's a concept that they already know about. Oh, okay, that concept is now Jesus. So what makes John different, though? And this is really important because John is Jewish. He has a Jewish background. He has Jewish thought. And it's going to line up with Jewish thinking. Now, I have already mentioned when we get to the idea of the Targums, that's the Aramaic translations of the Hebrew Bible. At that point, I think is where John's really at here. But it's a Hebrew conception. And the first thing is, and what John is trying to get at here, is that God is a relational God. And we human beings share in the identity of God. We're made in the image of God, and we can then relate like persons who relate in a relationship, like a father to a child. It's not a cold, hard, independent force that we may be influenced by, but is ultimately just a force. The logos, the word, is a person. And a person we can relate to, and we can be in relationship with. And God is a God who covenants with his people. And the covenant, the idea of covenant, presupposes relationship, just like a marriage covenant. And so the metaphor of marriage, we find that throughout the Old Testament, well, even into the New Testament. So the radical aspect of what John is doing by identifying the Logos with Jesus is that the Logos was born into the flesh and dwelt with his people. And that's radically different because when we engage, when we make Jesus Lord, it's not to some cold, distant power within the cosmos. You actually start engaging Jesus on a personal relationship type level. And what we experience is relationship and forgiveness and the grace of God and love that you don't get from a cold, distant power, no matter how rational that power might be. And that is radical. Because now you just felt love. Imagine being a slave. You had no parents. You grew up to a slave master. Nobody ever loved you. You had no connection at the level of love, and you hear about Jesus, and you suddenly feel the sense of love that you've never felt before, and it flips the world upside down. So it's a huge, radical difference that John is showing us compared to simply a force of rationality that exists in the universe. And this is what, when John says, they will know that I am real because you love one another. That's how the world knows that Jesus is real. Not because we can rationally figure it out with a smart philosophical statement that ties it all together. A smart philosophical statement without love is a clanging bell, Paul says. So this is radical what John's doing. Let me give you one thing, one resource you may consider. This book, it just really helped me broaden my perspective. When I was really looking to say, look, I want to find out the history leading up to John. Tell me the backstory, right? This was a book I found, and it's quite detailed, but it did help me broaden my own foundation from the Greek sense all the way into our New Testament, all the way up to Trinity. So from Logos to Trinity, it's the evolution of religious beliefs from Pythagoras. So he goes back to Pythagoras. I only went back to Heraclitus, to Tertullian, who's really seems to be the father of putting together what we know today as the Trinity. So I think you can find this book online. I'll go look at the description section below. If I can find a link, I'll put it down there. But that's a good read, comprehensive, and it will help broaden your understanding of how we got there. What's the background to this Logos business? So, main point today, remember? Main point, there's a background. It's not a new idea. If you're Greek, that word Logos carries way more than the word for word. Now, if you're Jewish, it's going to do the same thing. We'll also look at wisdom. We'll look at memra in the Aramaic tradition. But for those Greeks, it was an underlying principle of order in the cosmos. The force that orders all things. It's comparable to the divine. It's transcendent. All things were created and ordered by the Logos, and the Logos enlightens our mind, is the process of rationally thinking about the cosmos. And then John comes along and says, I'll tell you what, folks, you really want to know what that Logos is? Let me tell you. He begins his gospel story telling you that Jesus is the Logos when it came down and tabernacled among his people. So next week, we'll go into, or the next lesson, we'll go into the compare the Jewish background. Shows up in a few different ways. We have wisdom, what's written in the wisdom literature, then how that's developed over time, say in Proverbs or in some of the Greek wisdom writing or Jewish wisdom writings that are in Greek. And then you have the Aramaic, and that'll really blow your mind if you're not familiar with the Targums. But this is really where scholars today are pointing that John is looking at. He's following that Aramaic tradition, and the word is memra. And so it's the gospel of the memra, the word. And when you see how those Aramaic translations use the word memra, you now realize that's what John's talking about, okay? Okay, so be sure to check these out as the lessons come out, and I think these will be very helpful for you to understand ultimately the Trinity and who Jesus is.